My name is Margot Hayes, and I am 71 years old. The life I've lived could fill a library of quiet joys and profound sorrows. But what I'm about to tell you is a story that redefined my very existence. It's a story that begins with an ending. The quietest day of my life, the day we buried my husband, Ernest. It's a story about how the bedrock of a family can turn to quicksand, and how the faintest digital whisper from beyond the grave can give you the strength to fight for the truth. This is not just a tale of crime. It is a testament to the enduring power of a love that refused to be silenced, even by death. The silence in the Spring Creek Cemetery that November morning was a physical presence. It wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive. A thick wool blanket smothering the world. The air was so cold it felt brittle, like it might shatter with a sound. I stood there in my best stand-only black dress, the same one I'd worn for my mother's funeral 2 decades prior, feeling the chill seep through the fabric and into my bones. 42 years of marriage, of shared breath and whispered dreams, were being lowered into a hole in the ground, and the universe had responded with this. Nothingness. The casket was all wrong. Too shiny, too rectangular, with brassy fittings that Ernest would have called garish. He was a man of oak and pine, of honest materials that returned to the earth without pretension. This box was Charles's choice, efficient, impersonal, and, I suspected, the cheapest option that wouldn't cause an outright scandal. My eldest son stood to my right, a pillar of somber propriety, in a suit that likely cost more than Ernest's first truck. To my left, Henry fidgeted, his eyes scanning the pathetic handful of mourners as if taking attendance. Behind them, their wives Charles's Jasmine, a sculpture of veiled disdain in black cashmere, and Henry's latest girlfriend, a young woman whose name I could never remember, formed a brittle, silent chorus. Where was everyone? Where were the men from the feed store who'd shared coffee with Ernest every morning for 30 years? The mothers whose children's bikes he'd repaired for free? The neighbors he'd helped through hard winters? The service had been a rushed, generic affair. The pastor's words a eulogy for a stranger. A hard worker, a quiet man, a loving father. True, but so pitifully incomplete. They said nothing of his laugh, which started as a low rumble in his chest and erupted into joyous thunder. They didn't mention how he could fix anything, not just machines, but hurt feelings and wounded pride. They omitted the secret loans, repaid in garden vegetables, and handshake promises that were the real currency of his life. As the final prayer dissipated into the gray air, a mechanical buzz against my hip bone cut through the night. It was a vulgar, alien sound in that sacred quiet. My old flip phone, a clamshell relic Ernest insisted I keep for emergencies. My fingers, clumsy and frozen inside my wool gloves, fumbled in my purse. A text from a number I didn't know. The words on the tiny, grainy screen were simple, yet they contained a universe of impossible hope and terrifying implication. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. The earth didn't tilt. It vanished. The polished oak, the raw mound of dirt, the somber faces all receded into a gray tunnel. The only real things were those 5 words, glowing with a malevolent, hopeful light. A sound escaped me, a choked gasp that was half sob, half denial. Doris, my dear friend and neighbor who had driven me, clutched my elbow. It's the shock, dear, she whispered, her voice thick with tears. Just lean on me. But I was no longer there. My mind was a frantic animal, alive, not him. Not him. My hands, trembling with a violence that felt seismic, typed a reply, my thumbs slipping on the tiny, cold buttons. Who are you? I hit send and stared, my breath held in my burning lungs. The reply was instantaneous, as if the sender had been waiting, watching this very scene unfold. I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons. Our sons. The possessive was a punch to the solar plexus, knocking the last vestige of air from my body. My eyes, wide and burning, snapped up from the phone. Across the gulf of the open grave, Charles was looking directly at me. His expression was perfect, the concerned firstborn, the protective son. His brow furrowed with a love that suddenly felt like a masterful performance. He gave me a slow, reassuring nod. It's all right, Mother, I'm here. But the text had rewired my perception. That nod now looked like a stage direction, a cue in a play whose script I hadn't read. My gaze flicked to Henry. He had his phone out now, his thumb scrolling, a faint, impatient sigh visible in the cloud of his breath. Was he checking the time, coordinating, watching? The world had cracked open, and a terrible, chilling light was pouring in. To understand the profundity of that fracture, you must understand what came before. You must understand the love that was betrayed. I met Ernest Hayes when I was 24, and the world was painted in the dusty, hopeful hues of a small town. Spring Creek wasn't just our home. It was our bloodstream. We grew up on the same sun-baked back roads, children of modest means and big, quiet dreams. My father was gone, and I spent my young adulthood cleaning other people's houses to keep a roof over my ailing mother's head. My uniform was a faded green dress and resold shoes. Ernest's kingdom was his father's bicycle shop, a dim, wonderful cave that smelled of grease and rubber and possibility. His hands were always stained. His smile was shy, and his heart was as solid and true as the anvil in the corner. I remember the first time he spoke to me as if it were this morning. A Tuesday, I was walking to the market, and he stepped out of his shop, wiping his hands on a rag. "Good morning, Margot," he said, his voice soft as the creek we were named for. He had a way of saying my name that made it sound like a precious thing. "Need me to check out your bike?" I didn't own a bike, but I found one to borrow, just to have a reason to go back. Our courtship was not grand, but it was deep-rooted. It was conversations under the town's ancient oak tree, its branches a cathedral of green. It was promises whispered as fireflies performed their evening dances. It was a simple wedding in the community hall, the air rich with the smell of potluck casseroles and unwavering hope. Our first home was a 2-bedroom house with a tin roof that sang a symphony during every rainstorm. We'd place pots and pans strategically on the floor, laughing as the ping 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 created a ridiculous melody. We were poor, but we were rich in a currency that mattered. We had real love, the kind that isn't bought or sold, but built, brick by patient brick, through shared struggle and silent understanding. When Charles was born, I thought my heart would physically burst from the sheer volume of joy. He was a beautiful baby, with Ernest's serious, dark eyes and my own tentative smile. 2 years later, Henry arrived, a sunnier echo of his brother. We poured everything we had into them. Ernest, though tired from dawn to dusk work in the shop, was a magical father. Sunday fishing trips by the river, lessons on how to hold a hammer, stories told by lamplight. He built a childhood for them out of time and attention, materials that were scarce and precious. I was the steady heartbeat of our home. The meals, the mended clothes, the kisses on scraped knees, the lullabies in the dark. We were a close family. Or so I believed. The change was subtle, a slow seepage of a new value system into the foundation of our lives. Charles, sharp and fiercely intelligent, was always ambitious. He began to look at our simple life not as a haven, but as a confinement. "Why don't we have a new car like the Martins?" he'd ask at 12, a frown etching his young brow. Henry, ever his brother's shadow, learned to echo the sentiment. The wound that never truly healed came when Charles turned 80. Ernest, his face shining with pride and hope, offered him a partnership in the shop. He saw it as passing on a legacy, not of wealth, but of skill, integrity, and community. Charles looked at his father's grease-lined hands, at the humble storefront with its peeling paint, and his reply was a dagger wrapped in contempt. "I don't want to get my hands dirty like you, Dad. I'm going to be someone important." I saw the light leave Ernest's eyes that night. He sat on the porch long after dark, staring at the stars with a sadness so profound it seemed to alter the very air around him. His son hadn't just rejected a job, he had rejected an entire way of being, a philosophy of life that valued substance over shine. Against the odds, or perhaps because of that driving hunger, Charles succeeded. He landed a job at a real estate firm in the city. Henry followed. They started making money, real money, the kind Ernest and I had only seen in magazines. At first, my maternal heart swelled with pride. My boys had escaped the gravitational pull of our modest orbit. They were building empires, but pride curdled into a quiet, persistent sadness. Visits became rare events, announced with the formality of state occasions. Phone calls grew shorter, dwindling from weekly chats to monthly check-ins that felt like logistical updates. When they did descend upon Spring Creek, it was in cars so sleek and silent they seemed to whisper of a different world. They wore suits that had never known a wrinkle, and they talked of investments, properties, market fluctuations, language foreign to our kitchen table. Their eyes, when they looked at us, held a strange mixture of pity and shame. We were no longer their beloved parents. We were an inconvenient relic, a living reminder of a past they were desperate to overwrite. "Mom, Dad," Charles said during one visit, gesturing vaguely at our cozy, cluttered living room, "you really should think about moving somewhere more suitable. This house is falling apart." He wasn't wrong. The porch sagged a little more each year. The wallpaper in the hallway was faded. But this house was the archive of our lives. It was where I'd rocked feverish babies, where we'd celebrated countless birthdays with homemade cake, where Ernest and I had slow danced in the kitchen, just because. It was filled with the ghosts of our laughter, the echoes of our arguments, the profound peace of 1,000 ordinary evenings. It wasn't just a structure, it was our story, written in every crack and creak. Ernest, always wiser than me in matters of the heart, saw the truth before I could bear to admit it. One night, as we drank our evening coffee on that sagging porch, he said, "Margot, money hasn't just changed their bank accounts, it's changed their hearts." "We aren't enough for them anymore," I argued, made excuses. They were busy, stressed, building their futures. But in the secret chambers of my soul, I knew he was right. We had lost our sons long before I lost my husband. I just didn't know the loss was a prelude to a crime. The most drastic shift came with Jasmine. Charles met her in the city and married her within a year. The first time he brought her home, she emerged from their luxury sedan in high heels that sank into the soft dirt of our driveway. Her face a mask of polite horror. She wore an elegant red dress that probably cost more than our living room furniture. "Nice to meet you," she said, extending only the very tips of her fingers. Her eyes performed a slow, meticulous inventory of our home, and I felt myself shrinking under her gaze, becoming small and simple and regrettable. During dinner, she pushed the food I'd prepared with so much love around her plate: my meatloaf, Ernest's favorite eating, almost nothing. Charles was uncharacteristically nervous, apologizing for things that had never needed apology. The dated appliances, the rustic furniture, the very air of our home. "Next time, we'll take them to a restaurant," he whispered to her, thinking I couldn't hear. But I heard. Every word was a tiny, precise cut. Henry, still single, absorbed his brother's new attitude like a sponge. His visits were brief, distracted affairs. He was always on his phone, closing deals even as we tried to ask about his life. "Mom, I've gotta run. Big meeting tomorrow," he'd say, already halfway out the door. Family Sundays, Christmas Eve gatherings, these traditions melted away, replaced by expensive, impersonal gifts delivered by courier or left on the porch during rushed 2-hour visits. Ernest and I grew old together, a duo against the gathering silence. He still worked in his shop, though his hands sometimes shook with a faint tremor. I still sewed, though my eyes needed stronger glasses. We made do with our small, hard-earned income, our pride a brittle shield against the unspoken offer of help. We didn't want their money, we wanted their time, their love. "You know what the saddest part is, Margot?" Ernest asked me one profound night, his hand covering mine on the porch railing. "It's not that they have money, it's that the money has made them believe we have no value anymore." The pressure began to intensify, morphing from suggestion to campaign. Charles bought a $200,000 house in an exclusive city neighborhood. Henry acquired a luxury condo. Suddenly, our sons were citizens of a financial universe we couldn't comprehend. "You should sell this place and move into a retirement community," Jasmine suggested brightly during one visit, as if proposing a trip to the cinema. "There are some lovely ones with activities and healthcare on site." A retirement community. The words were a slap. After a lifetime of building a home, of raising a family within these walls, they wanted to deposit us in a polite, medicalized warehouse, a place for people whose stories were considered complete. "We don't need a home," Ernest replied, his voice calm but edged with a dignity that was fiercer than anger. "We have one, right here." But I saw the look that passed between Charles and Henry. To them, we were no longer parents. We were a logistical problem, a portfolio of assets and liabilities that needed managing. Then came the papers. Charles arrived one evening with a sleek leather folder. "Dad, Mom, I've been thinking about your future. This house is an asset, but it's not doing anything for you. It's worth, what? Maybe $80,000. If you sell, I can add some funds so you can get a nice, modern condo. A lock and leave. Much easier." He spoke about our home, the cradle of his own childhood, as if it were a stock that had underperformed. Ernest looked at him with infinite sadness. "Son, this house isn't an asset. It's our life. Working in my shop isn't a liability. It's what gives my days meaning." "But you could get hurt," Henry chimed in, his voice uncharacteristically hard. "At your age, a fall or an accident, it's a major risk." Their words were clothed in concern, but I sensed the impatience vibrating beneath them, an urgency I couldn't name. The following months were a tense siege. They brought realtors without warning. They had the house appraised without our consent. They spoke of what's best, for everyone with the condescending air of executives streamlining a failing department. During a painfully awkward dinner, Charles finally laid bare the brutal calculus. Jasmine and I are planning for children. The expenses will be significant. If you sold the house now, that money could function as an early inheritance. It would help us get established. An early inheritance. He was asking for his inheritance while we were still breathing. The audacity stole the breath from my lungs. Ernest's jaw tightened, a tiny muscle flickering. "Son," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "when your mother and I die, what we have will be yours. But while we are alive, our lives and our decisions are our own." "Don't be stubborn," Henry snapped, a harshness in his tone I'd never heard before. "You're living in the past. You need to be practical." That night, after they left, Ernest and I sat at the kitchen table until the sky turned from black to indigo to pale gray. For the first time in 42 years, we voiced the unthinkable. "Something's wrong, Margot," Ernest said, his eyes holding a fear I'd never seen in them. "This isn't just ambition. This isn't just impatience. There's a hunger behind this, a desperation. I don't like the feel of it." 3 weeks before he died, Charles came to see me alone. He was unusually solemn. He sat at the old kitchen table, where he'd done his homework 1,000 times, and took my hands. "Mom," he said, his gaze intense, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, Henry and I will always take care of you." At the time, I had taken it as a strange but sweet reassurance. Now, remembering it by his grave, the phrase "no matter what happens" coiled in my stomach like a snake. What did he know was going to happen? The accident occurred on a Tuesday morning. Ernest had left at his usual time, Jam 5:30 menit, to open the shop. I was in the kitchen, peeling potatoes for his lunch, when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, and utterly alien. "Mrs. Hayes, Memorial Hospital. Your husband has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately." The world dissolved into a slow-motion nightmare. Doris drove me because my hands were shaking too violently to hold the steering wheel. The whole way, my mind chanted a futile prayer. "Burn, cut, break, anything but gone. Please, anything but gone." When we arrived, Charles and Henry were already in the waiting room. This detail, in my panic, barely registered. How did they know? The hospital had called me. "Mom," Charles said, enveloping me in a hug that felt convincing in its strength. "It's bad. A machine at the shop. Some kind of explosion. He has severe burns. Head trauma." Henry stood beside him, his eyes redrimmed but dry. He looked less like a grieving son and more like a man waiting for a stressful business transaction to conclude. The ICU was a landscape of horror. Ernest was a mummy of bandages and wires, a once-vital man reduced to a series of beeps and blinking lights. I took his only visible hand, cool and still. "Ernest, my love, I'm here," I whispered. "You fight. You come back to me. And then I swear it on all I hold." Dear, I felt it, the faintest, most imperceptible squeeze. A flutter of his fingers against mine. His eyelids twitched. He moved. I cried to the nurse. His hand, he squeezed. The nurse checked the monitors with a practiced, pitying look. "Sometimes there are involuntary reflexes, Mrs. Hayes. It doesn't indicate consciousness." But I knew my warrior was still in there, battling against a tide I couldn't see. For 3 days, I kept vigil. Charles and Henry took shifts, but their focus was elsewhere. I overheard Henry asking pointed questions about hospital billing codes. I saw Charles in hushed conversations with doctors, using terms like prognosis and quality of life. On the second day, Charles sat beside me, his voice low and practical. "Mom, we looked into Dad's insurance. He has a life insurance policy for $50,000. There's also a workers' comp policy that could pay $75 more if this is ruled a work-related accident." I stared at him, disgust cutting through my grief. "I don't care about the money. I care about your father." "Of course," he said smoothly, but his eyes held the cold, assessing gleam of an accountant. The doctor's final meeting was a death sentence. Severe brain damage, no hope of meaningful recovery. A choice between indefinite, mechanical existence or letting go. "We try everything," I sobbed. "We fight." Charles and Henry exchanged a glance that made my blood run cold. "Mom," Charles said, putting a hand on my shoulder, "we have to be practical. Dad wouldn't want to live like this. He'd hate being a burden." "A burden," I erupted, a fury I didn't know I possessed tearing through me. "He's your father. He changed your diapers. He taught you to ride a bike. He is not a burden. We have to think of you, too," Henry added, his voice flat. "The medical bills will wipe you out." Again, money. Always money. While their father lay dying, they were doing cost-benefit analysis. Ernest died at 4:37 a.m. On Friday, the machines screamed their final, flat-lined elegy. I held his still warm hand until they made me let go, my own heart feeling as if it had been torn from my chest and buried with him. Charles and Henry arrived at the hospital an hour later. They were not disheveled with grief. They were organized, efficient. They had paperwork, contacts at funeral homes. "We've already spoken to Spring Creek Funeral Home," Charles informed me as I sat, hollowed out, in a plastic chair. "They can take him this morning." "We've also initiated the insurance claim," Henry added. Their cold competence was a discordant note in the symphony of my agony, but I was too submerged in sorrow to heed it. Charles took over all funeral arrangements. It was to be small, simple, quick. "It's what Dad would have wanted," he said, when I weakly protested the lack of music, the absence of a proper viewing. But the Ernest I knew would have wanted his community around him. He would have wanted stories and maybe even a badly played him on a harmonica. The day of the funeral was bleak. The sky a lid of uniform gray, and there, by the grave, as the first shovelful of dirt hit the casket with that awful, final sound, my phone buzzed with the message that changed everything. "I'm alive. That's not me in the casket." The journey home was a blur. That night, alone in the echoing tomb of our house, a terrifying clarity began to pierce the fog of grief. The pieces, jagged and sinister, started to align. The unexplained insurance policies, their preternatural efficiency, their presence at the hospital before I was a suspicion, dark and unformed, began to writhe in my mind. I went to Ernest's study, to the old oak desk. In a locked drawer, I found the metal box. The life insurance policy was there, updated to $50,000 just 6 months prior. A workers' comp policy, purchased 2 months ago. A fortune Ernest, a man who saved rubber bands and darned his own socks, would never have taken out on a whim. Who suggested this? My phone buzzed again. Check the bank account, see who's been moving money. The next morning, I went to the bank. Mrs. Thompson, her face soft with condolence, printed the statements. Over the last 3 months, Withdrawals of $1,000, $3,000, $4,000, $8,000 gone from our savings. Ernest came in, Mrs. Thompson said. Seemed a bit forgetful about it. Bless him. Charles was with him, helping him understand the forms. Charles. Helping. Ernest, who balanced his shop books to the penny, who could recite our budget backwards, needed help understanding a withdrawal. I remembered him just weeks before, reading the fine print on a medicine bottle without his glasses, squinting playfully, just keeping these old eyes honest. He'd winked. He was never confused about money. The evidence was a trail of breadcrumbs leading into a dark forest. Another text arrived. Go to Ernest's shop. Look in his desk. There are things you didn't see. The bike shop was a place of profound memory, and entering it without him was agony. But what I found was more disturbing than grief. It was clean, not tidy, but sterilized. The floors had been scrubbed. The tools hung in a display of unnatural order. The large air compressor, the supposed source of the catastrophic explosion, sat in the corner, its dark green casing unmarked. No soot, no blast patterns, no shattered glass. The air didn't smell of fire or molten metal. It smelled of lemon polish and dust. There had been no explosion. In the desk, I found his personal notebook. The entries were a chronicle of dawning dread. Charles insists, I need more insurance. Says it's for Margot, but the paperwork seems to benefit him more. Henry brought papers to modernize the shop. Urged me to sign quickly. Why? The hurry. And finally, a sealed envelope addressed to me in his firm hand. My dearest Margot, if you are reading this, I am gone. In recent months, I have felt a chill I cannot explain. Charles and Henry are not just ambitious, they are desperate. Jasmine pressures them constantly. Yesterday, Charles told me I should be more careful because at my age, any accident could be fatal. It did not sound like concern. It sounded like a warning. I love you more than life itself. If something happens to me, trust your instinct, not their smiles. Do not trust our sons. Forever yours, Ernest. The letter fluttered from my hands. He had known. He had felt the shadow approaching and tried to arm me with the truth. That evening, Charles visited, oozing false concern. He talked of the insurance money, of managing it for me, of nice retirement communities. The mask was slipping. I could see the calculation in his eyes. They weren't planning to care for me. They were planning to contain me, to control the assets my husband's death had unlocked. The texts from the unknown number became my lifeline, a guide through the nightmare. Tomorrow, go to the police. Ask for the accident report. Sergeant O'Connell, a man who'd known Ernest since boyhood, was baffled. Accident report, Margot. There isn't one. No report of an explosion at the shop. He lowered his voice. The ambulance report we got. It mentioned symptoms consistent with toxic ingestion. Methanol poisoning. The world dropped out from under me. Poisoning. Not an accident. Murder. Why wasn't I told? My voice was a ghost of itself. The next of kin who handled the paperwork chores, and Henry requested that detail be kept confidential, said you were too fragile. The next of kin. My sons had concealed a murder and framed it as an accident. I confronted Henry. The panic in his eyes was a confession. He fled, making a frantic phone call from my porch. That night, the final warning came. They're coming together tomorrow. They will say you are crazy. Do not eat or drink anything they offer. They arrived like a committee of doom. Charles, Henry, Jasmine, and a man introduced as Dr. Albright, Jasmine's uncle, a psychiatrist. They brought pastries and special coffee. The neighbors say, "You've been acting strangely." "Mom," Charles began, his voice set up thick with fake worry, asking bizarre questions. "We're concerned it's senile paranoia, a common grief reaction." They laid out their plan with breathtaking audacity, a supportive psychiatric evaluation, leading to guardianship, leading to them controlling my finances and my freedom. They would declare me incompetent and sweep me into a home just as they had swept Ernest into the ground. I faced them down, my voice trembling but clear. "I know there was no explosion. I know about the methanol. I've been to the police." The masks shattered entirely. Charles's face hardened into something cruel and unfamiliar. "You foolish old woman," he hissed. "We were offering you a soft place to land. Now you'll get the hard way. We have a doctor's statement. We'll have you declared incapable by lunchtime tomorrow." After they left, the definitive text arrived. "Margot, this is Stephen Callahan. Ernest hired me. They poisoned him with methanol. I have audio evidence. Meet me tomorrow, 3 p.m., Corner Cafe." Stephen Callahan was a man who looked like he carried the weight of other people's secrets in the lines of his face. He sat across from me in the back booth of the tired old cafe and placed a digital recorder between us. He was a brave man. "You're Ernest," Stephen said, his voice a low rumble. He knew something was terribly wrong. "He hired me to find out what, and to protect you, no matter what." He pressed play. Ernest's voice filled the space, weary and scared. "Stephen, if something happens to me, it won't be an accident. They're pushing me to increase the insurance." Henry asks too many questions about my routine. "It feels like they're casing the place, but it's their own father's life." Then, Charles's voice, cold and clear, on a phone call. "The methanol is perfect. Mimics a stroke. By the time anyone thinks otherwise, we'll be the grieving sons, and Mom will be too broken to question anything. Then Henry, the day before the murder, everything's set. Charles spikes the coffee tomorrow. The old man will drink his own death." I wept silently, the sound of my sons plotting their father's murder etching itself into my soul forever. Stephen had more. Photos of Charles buying methanol with cash, financial records showing both sons drowning in debt, Charles to a loan shark, Henry 2 gambling rings, and the final, horrific recording made after the funeral. "Charles, once the insurance pays out, we need to deal with Mom. Can't have her snooping." Henry, "How?" Charles, "Same as Dad, but we make it look like a suicide, a heartbroken widow. No one will question it. Then everything is finally ours." My own sons had not only murdered their father for money, they had planned to murder me. "We have to go to the police now," Stephen said. "They're seeing a judge for the competency order tomorrow at 10. That night, with Stephen beside me, I walked into the police station and placed the recorder. The photos, the bank statements, and Ernest's letter on Sergeant O'Connell's desk. We played the tapes. The seasoned sergeant turned pale. "My God, Margot," he whispered. "This is monstrous." The district attorney was called. Warrants were drawn. The arrests at dawn were swift. Charles, in his monogrammed silk pajamas, denied everything until he heard his own voice on the recording. Then he crumpled into silent shock. Henry tried to run a final, pathetic act of cowardice and was caught 6 blocks away. The trial was a short, brutal affair. The evidence was unassailable. The recordings were played in open court. The town listened, horrified, as the voices of Spring Creek's golden boys calmly discussed poisoning their father and then their mother. The jury found them guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy in less than a day. The sentence was life without parole. Justice was served, but it was a hollow, devastating victory. My family was annihilated. Charles, unable to face the infinite cage he'd built for himself, hanged himself in his cell with a bedsheet. Henry suffered a complete psychotic break, lost in a prison psych ward, haunted by the ghost of the father he killed. I sold the house on Maple Lane. The memories there were too layered, too poisoned by betrayal. With a portion of the insurance money, the blood money, I could never spend on myself, I established the Ernest Hayes Foundation for victims of family crimes. The rest allowed me a small, sunny cottage on the edge of town with a blank slate of a garden. Stephen Callahan remained. He is my friend, my chosen family. We have coffee every Wednesday. He sometimes asks if I regretted unleashing the truth, destroying what was left of my family. I never hesitate. Never, I tell him. The truth was Ernest's final gift to me, a terrible, painful gift, but it was real. They took his life, but they couldn't make me live a lie. They couldn't make me dishonor his love by pretending. I tend my garden now. I grow roses and sunflowers, things that seek the light. On Sundays, I cut a few and take them to the simple stone I had placed for Ernest. It reads, Ernest Hayes, beloved, your truth saved me. The foundation is his living legacy. We help others, the elderly woman being pressured into signing over her home, the man whose children are draining his accounts, the people who hear that whispering doubt in their own families and need the strength to listen. Last year, a woman named Eleanor came to us. Her story was a mirror of mine. We helped her find the evidence, face the truth. When her brother was convicted, she hugged me, sobbing, "You gave me the courage to save myself. That is why the pain was worth it." I am 71. My hair is white. My body has the aches of a life fully lived. But my eyes, Doris tells me, are clear. They hold a peace that was hard-won. I have learned that family is not a title granted by blood, but a sacred trust earned through love, loyalty, and the unwavering commitment to do no harm. Ernest was my true family. Stephen, Doris, the people at the foundation, they are my family. The quietest day of my life was long ago, by a graveside, holding a phone that held a whisper from the darkness. The days since have been filled with the difficult, beautiful, resonant noise of a life, reclaimed, a life lived. At last, wide awake in the clear, unforgiving, and ultimately liberating light of the truth. And in that truth, I have found a peace deeper than any silence. If you like my story, then like the video and subscribe the channel for my more life-changing videos. Thanks for watching my story.